So we are going to be learning tonight parenting with Mr. Peace with before in an age of anxiety. And you came tonight to not hear from me, but from someone else. And I want to introduce you to someone. Maybe all you know, I don't want to use it. Maybe all you know about our speaker is these gorgeous photos that we've been posting online. Right? Like I asked Jeremy to put a microphone on tonight. He's like, I barely fit in this shirt. So feel later, gentlemen, right? Anyways, this is Jeremy, and there's more to him than just this. I've known Jeremy for, I think, over 15 years. I lived in Lethbridge, and there was a few years where we were partnering on different youth things, youth conference things. I didn't last too long. Life was too busy for me, and I finished up. But I continued to see and watch what you were doing, Jeremy. I continued to see how God was working. And I've always seen Jeremy as a man that does everything from your core with integrity. And his focus and intentionality is what I see most in him. Jeremy, you have a really sharp mind. This guy is just brilliant. But never once have I seen you use it in a way just to be like, look at what I know and what you don't. But you've used it as connection. A point to connect so that you can shepherd people well. And, there were this weekend about 40 of us from South Abbotsford that went to this Youth Workers Community Conference. And it was, yes, youth related, but it was next generation really was the focus. And I just relearned and remembered, Jerry, your surgical ability to ask good questions, that in a room of 750 people, it felt like we were the only ones listening and talking to you, right? And so I think tonight we'll have the exact same experience. Really, there's just a selflessness about you that you're an in-the-moment type of person. I had a friend, Peyton, that came in, rattled, and there was just, right before we started, you made time to talk with him. So anyway, so Jared is someone that I care about a lot. We've never really lived anywhere near each other, but I am thankful for our friendship and the way I see you impacting the next generation and helping us to do a little better. And one of the things I really think is, it takes a village to raise our kids. But if we don't have a good map or know where we're going, we're going to get into trouble. But thankfully, Jer knows this map well, and is going to be a good guide for us tonight and tomorrow as well. So hey, I want to give a round of applause for my friend Jer here. Thank you.
So you guys know Jeremiah, of course, and I have known him for about 15 years. I didn't plan on sharing this, but as you were talking, it made me think of my most recent favorite memory is our mutual friend that brought us together. His name is Sid Coop. He's the director of our organization hosting conferences. And so Sid had a birthday a couple years ago. Jerry worked for him a number of years in Lethbridge, and Sid was turning 50. And so if you can imagine this, there's a group of pastors. Sid does a good job bringing people together. So there's a group of pastors, and we're like, we got to celebrate Sid, and we got to make it a big deal, just because 50 was a big deal for him. He had some complications in his family. His dad had died young, his brother died young, and so we're like, let's take him to Las Vegas. And so, legitimately, if you could imagine, 6 guys like us, Sid, jumping into Ubers, and then the driver's always like, oh, what are you guys doing? We're like, we're celebrating this guy's birthday, 50 years old. And it's like, oh yeah, you're in Vegas, awesome, what are you guys gonna do? And we're like, yeah, we're 6 pastors. And he's like, no drinking, no clubs. We're going to the hockey game, we're going shoe shopping, and we're going to see a little bit of Topgolf. So we had a blast in Vegas together, and it was a lot of fun. Well, it is so great to be here. My name is indeed Jeremy, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. This is something fun that we get to do with parents as part of our organization, and with youth workers, is talking about young people. And the fun part is that today, while I'm here, I am still a little bit of an expert on parenting adolescents, because I don't have any of them yet. This is my family, and for the longest time I was an expert on all parenting, and then I started having kids. And so now I'm just kind of in the thick of it. This is my wife Chantel, just this last Christmas, our 10-year-old Riker, our 8-year-old Archer, and our 6-year-old Ember, who is our favorite. And we come from, it's easy to tell why, but I come from the East Coast, so Moncton, New Brunswick. If you've been on the East Coast, it's the part of the country with the highest tides in the world, where you can see boats sitting on the ocean floor, which is kind of cool. And then they fill up, the water comes in, and they're floating. Later, this is Alma, just an hour from my house. And then the other claim to fame on the East Coast is lobster. And this is just last summer, our lobster feed. We try to do it every so often. The crazy thing about lobster on the East Coast, if you've been, is that it's really affordable if you know the right people. And so you need to know and have kind of like a fishmonger, somebody that can like rattle up your feed. And so mine is Ron. If you know a Ron, you can get cheap lobster. This is my father-in-law, which is my other claim to fame. And of course, Ember, again, clearly a favorite. But we have a blast on the East Coast, and our family is loving being there. But it is fun to be in a place without snow. So we're glad to be here as well. Before we get into the stuff, I like to share a little bit of my family story, only because I think in these days, there's so many varieties to what families look like and what people's experiences are like. And so this part is not something that is like, what I said to Jeremiah beforehand, I'm like, I don't necessarily put this like out there online, but it is my story and it is my family. But just because my family is complicated. And so this is the part that won't be like on the YouTube video, kind of cut it. But I say it because, being in ministry, I've been a pastor for 15 years. I've worked at churches in Ontario and in New Brunswick, and doing this work, kind of hosting conferences and training up youth workers across the country. I end up in a lot of conversations with families, with with people raising young people, a lot of times talking through what it's like to have teenagers these days. And the fascinating conversation that I had about parenting was just 3 weeks ago. And growing up, all of these kinds of things all around is a part of like my family's story. And it's interesting, at least as I get a chance to reflect on it, because you saw my family, we're starting kind of our part of the family tree. We're setting some new things forward and hoping to create something that maybe for our generations after us will be, God-honoring and life-giving. But recognizing where I've come from sometimes can be helpful to note that it doesn't actually need to, how do I say this? It's not, the circumstances that kids find themselves in, God still uses, God can still redeem any circumstance. That's where I want to go with that. Because you find yourself and you're like, oh man, this is not ideal. And that's probably true, and there's lots of truth to that. And yet, the beautiful thing about the gospel and the beautiful thing that God does is that He can bring people from even difficult circumstances and do good work. And it's not to say that, again, our family's perfect or that, Chantel and I've got it figured out, but I'm just grateful that we have this great example of God being faithful even in the midst of that, and the people that He brought around us. About 10 years ago, we started the adventure of having a family. And so this is kind of like the last day that I was a parenting expert. And there's actually like this really specific moment where I realized that things I didn't quite plan appropriately, or I didn't know what I thought I knew, because I had read so many books. When Chantel got pregnant, this was like, oh, I'm in it. Like I ordered the things, I was reading the blogs, like I'm gonna like do the expert, research on how it's all supposed to go. And she's a teacher, and so she's kind of into that vein too. And so, we just kind of piece things together, like, oh, we'll have a plan, and like this is gonna be great. We're gonna ace this whole parenting thing. And I just knew, like, oh, this is gonna be fairly straightforward. Sure, there's gonna be some bumps along the way, but at this point, it's like, hey, we're feeling pretty good. The baby came out, the baby was healthy. Everything seemed not too bad. I should have shared, I have a funny picture that I think I kind of saw things were going wrong. I made a shirt for the delivery that said, I did this to you. And I thought it was hilarious. And so I take the sweater off as she's going through contractions, and I'm like asking the nurse, like, hey, can you take our picture? Like, isn't this hilarious? And the nurse is like, that's not a good idea. I'm like, no, it's a great idea. And she's like, And so it was probably about 3 weeks after this point, and I asked Chantel, like, can I share this story? She's like, you have a weird memory. But yeah, so 3 weeks after this, I remember we lived in a mini home in Miramichi, New Brunswick. And so the mini home was beautiful because our bedroom was at one end, and then Riker was at the other end. And having read all the books, the plan was we're going to let our son kind of cry it out method. Some of you might remember that. And so like that was the deal. And he was far enough away that I'm like, I can sleep, he can cry, we're fine. And I remember a few weeks in, Chantel bringing our crying baby, and she did this quite often, back into our room, which was like, this is confusing because A, we had planned to let him cry it out, and then B, I can't sleep if he's crying in our room. And so she's trying to like look after him, and he's crying, and I'm like, hey, think we're supposed to take him back to his room. And she gives me a look, and she's like, that's not happening. I'm like, but I thought we read the books, and this is the plan. And she's like, no. I'm like, okay, well, I'm gonna go then. And so I got up, not an expert, left the room, and then closed the door behind myself and went and slept. A beautiful night's rest. And that was coincidentally also the night that I was clearly not a marriage expert either. So these are the life experiences of people trying to sort it out, and this is the journey. But before I tell you some things I have discovered, I did learn afterwards that although I may not be a parenting expert, I'm a parenting meme expert, and so I can find the ones that really hit the nail on the head. I'm a big dad, I was referring to myself, as I changed my son out of last night's pajamas into tonight's pajamas. Yeah, done that a couple times. And then my wife's favorite one, my name is Mom, but my full name is Mom. Yeah, absolutely. So the point is that this is a journey that when you've got kids, I mean, you're on it and we're in it, and it's a challenge. There's ups and there's downs, and we're trying to figure it out as we go. But before we get into some of the ideas and maybe even the helpful tools and resources that are out there for us, I'd love to start by just kind of talking about your hopes and dreams for your kids, because it kind of sets the tone for what we're up for and what we're trying to see happen and what we're trying to accomplish. And we can just do this because this room is fairly reasonable, like it's just as kind of an open conversation. But if you put thought into this, or even if you're just kind of shooting from the hip in this moment, if you've already raised your kids and you want to kind of chime in, by all means, but we'd just love to hear, like, as you think about raising up the kids that God's entrusted to you, what are your hopes and dreams for them? And it could be in all sorts of different ranges and parts of their life, but what do you hope? What do you dream for them? We dreamed that they'd sleep, and they didn't, so if they did, we probably don't have kids, is what we say, but we only have 3, and that's okay too. Well, yeah, for you, what are your hopes and dreams for your kids? Anybody want to kind of share with the group?
First priority is faith, so that they learn God's word, love it, and live it.
Yep, I love that. Yeah, faith. Absolutely. Anybody else?
That they would have the boldness to stand up for what's right.
Boldness to stand up for what's right. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great dream.
I think something for me that I didn't grow up with was just being aware of my emotions and that you can have uncomfortable emotions.
Oh, yeah.
And I grew up like, anger is bad, or sadness. We don't want you to be sad, let's be happy. So I think just being emotionally aware and emotionally strong.
Yes. Shoot, I'm going to try to end up sharing stories that I'm going to say we should cut, or like I got to be careful. So there's a family member in our family. I'm not going to say their name, but my wife and I are doing that same kind of thing, trying to teach like emotions, and so my kids are like kind of used to that, like and we'll get into this too, but this is like 2 years ago, and they were talking to a family member. They're like, what was mommy like when she was growing up, and did she ever have overs? And and this person was like, yeah, but when she got angry, she had to sit in the corner and stare at the wall. And one of my kids was like, but aren't all emotions valid? It's like, oh yeah, it's generational. Sometimes like some difficulty to disconnect. Yeah, it was an interesting Christmas. Other hopes and dreams.
I think that they get to experience their own dreams.
Yeah.
Seeing their dreams come true.
Yep. That's fascinating, yeah. Let's do 2 more and then we'll continue on. Somebody back here.
I hope that they treat their kids treat them like they treat us.
Yes, amen. One more.
Use their gifts and talents to serve humanity.
Gifts and talents to serve humanity, yeah. It's incredible. It's an interesting exercise because it takes that step back. So often we're in the trenches of parenting, dealing with just the stuff that's right in front of us. You know, in the younger days, it's getting through the day, it's trying to feed them something healthy, it's trying to get them to sleep, and later on you're trying to sort of, okay, school and to manage the emotions to it, and then later on it morphs and it's relationships and the friends and the connections, and it is not wrong, those are the right things, but to have space and time, even just to step back and ask the question, like, what are we hoping to do here, and where are we trying to go here? What are we trying to offer to them? One of the things that our organization does is national research projects, typically around faith formation. So we did one in 2019 around what it takes for young people to continue on with Jesus, follow Christ into their young adult years after high school. And then we were part of this project through the pandemic that was interestingly kind of interviewing parents and about raising kids with faith. And one of the things that seemed to come out quite often when you talk with parents, and you know, if you thought about it, I'm sure some people, this is kind of something that would bubble to the top as well, but typically when you survey parents and ask about hopes and dreams, the easy access or the easy answers, you're like, oh, I just want my kids to be happy. And in some ways that's the standard stock answer for parents anywhere. Like, I want my kids to turn out in a way that they're okay or that they're happy. And the work lately that I've been really impressed by is Arthur C. Brooks, Catholic Christian actually, who co-wrote this beautiful book with Oprah, and he's a Harvard professor, and he's been talking a lot about this idea of happiness and what it actually means and takes to be happy. And this kind of helps us launch into this conversation because happiness, as he describes it, is actually something that is worth contending for, but it's different than most people think. So when we're raising our kids, sometimes if we're wrestling with the idea of happiness, we have to recognize that it's not actually a specific destination. You don't just live and arrive at happiness. It's actually the journey that you take along the way. And the way that he describes it is that happiness actually has kind of three key macronutrients. That there's happiness is made up by enjoyment and satisfaction and purpose. And it'll take a long time to kind of tease those out and explain them, but what's helpful for us is to recognize that when we think about our kids and we think about raising up this next generation, we're trying to instill in them these kinds of values that actually are perhaps different than the instant, different than the simple and kind of shallow levels of happiness and shallow levels of even purpose in walking through the world. And so the way that he would describe it as enjoyment is actually taking the work and foregoing pleasures in order to actually get to this place where you can experience the kind of enjoyment of the things around you, or satisfaction requiring sacrifice. And it doesn't fully last. It's about this sense of being able to push away the things so that you can focus on what really matters. And you're satisfied after like a good day's work, you know? And purpose is almost always entails suffering because you're called to something that is significant. It's going to require you to give up some of yourself for the sake of another. And so for each of our kids, and as we think about raising them up in the midst of all of this, this kind of anxiousness that's around us, we're trying to find these kinds of goals and these things that are going to require something of our kids. It's going to require something that isn't going to feel great in the moment. It's going to require something of us. And sometimes it's a little bit scary. And so for each of us, I think the question that I'd love to kind of contend for is, what is it about this world or this day or this age that actually is kind of intimidating for us as parents? What do you find is kind of scary about raising kids in this generation? And sometimes, and I heard from a few of you, you get a chance to hear what it was like before, you remember what it was like growing up as a kid, and it feels kind of different. And so as we're launching into, raising up, and we've got these hopes and these dreams, the obstacles that we seem to face can be kind of cumbersome, can be kind of challenging. And so, let's try it this way, because maybe sometimes revealing this kind of stuff publicly is challenging, but why don't you just chat with like the person next to you and people around you and share like, hey, what's something that kind of scares or is intimidating to you, as a means of like, let's just get these thoughts kind of flowing, if that makes sense. So turn to the person with you or around you. What is scary about parenting today in your mind? How quickly things change. What kind of things do you mean?
Well, when I was a kid, friends for the last 3 years, not weeks.
Yeah.
All the different apps that we're dealing with, and things just change so much quicker than they were.
Yeah, I rocked the yo-yo for I think probably a good year or two.
Remember those little lined up McDonald's toys that were great all the way through high school?
Yeah. Yeah, things change fast.
Yeah.
Things change fast.
Explains a lot.
Which if you can stick out your wardrobe, things do come around, and as long as you stay the same size, it does actually work out, which is a challenge. Yeah.
That anything goes.
Anything goes.
You can be informed about anything and it's fake news. You can be anybody you want to be and
Yeah.
that's okay.
Yeah.
No effort, there's no suffering in trying to accomplish something. It's just, you want it, you get it. You want to be somebody else today, that's okay.
Yeah.
But that's not what we hold to or believe as a family.
Yeah.
So how do you continuously bump into that and communicate that over and over and over again?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a permissiveness that is it's kind of instilled culturally, like here they get it from all different sources. Yeah. Yeah. What else scares you or intimidates you?
They can get like the instant gratification through social media, or like, we had to go up to the dictionary to find things, right?
Yeah.
Like, they just go online, or,
Yeah.
so they can get, their access to anything is scary.
Yeah. Yeah, access to anything, and there is something, and they're doing. I don't have the research here for this one, but like with ChatGPT and the rise of the AI models, like there's a change in the way your brain operates when you're accessing things. Now we'll see this. There is a sense that technology will change, and so people were nervous when calculators were invented that people would forget how to do important math things, and that's true, they did. But there are pieces that are worth understanding and recognizing that your brain and our understanding of how we learn and even relate to people changes depending on the tools that we have at our disposal, for sure. Yeah, what else?
Well, on that same vein, the piece that scares me the most is that they can get answers anywhere, but it's also just from random sources, and not that they'll lose the ability or interest in bouncing ideas off mentors or parents or friends, and the loss of community and people that care about them that are going to influence them, because they'll get really good answers from those sources. But does that mean it's the most healthy method or outcomes?
Yeah, where the influences come from as decisions are being made, and how do you process things? Yeah, there's a story of I don't have it fully formed, but something along those lines of a kid making a decision, and the family's asking about it, and he's like, well, I already kind of sorted it out from ChatGPT, and I think it knows better, and it's like there's something there that is challenging to kind of sort of.
Or that the parent won't even know they're asking the question.
That's true too. Yeah.
Even that's a step ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Something from over here?
We talked about AI changing the landscape of everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd say like the goalposts for what's true and what's untrue are always moving.
Yeah.
Nothing's like socially or culturally wrong. It's just like, it's like a moving target.
Yeah, it's a moving target, absolutely. There's a sense, and this is kind of what so when I started in youth ministry 15 years ago, there's this commercial that I want to show you that we would use to kind of talk through the onslaught. It's actually called Onslaught. Some of you will remember it. Dove actually put it together. But the onslaught of messaging that our kids experience. And although this is an old commercial, the sense is still kind of the same, that when you've got kids in the world, they're walking into, it seems like, an onslaught of messaging from all these other sources, and trying to understand what's our responsibility to help them or protect them or guide them or anything along those lines is the big challenge, because all the messages will change and they're tweaked and they're different. ChatGPT now as opposed to Facebook, from 10 years ago for kids. But the same truth is that there's this onslaught of things that we would say are not helpful, that aren't true, or that are going to lead them astray, and we've got to figure out what it means to actually, again, contend for the hearts of our kids. And so this is a little bit hard to watch, and certainly you don't have to if you don't want to, but this is just, at least for me, has always been the thing that has reminded me of the challenge that we're facing, because the time that we spend with our students and our kids is really, really critical but we have to recognize the world that they're walking into has got a lot of other messages with them. And this is an example of what that kind of looks like. Wild, eh? Now this is like 15 years ago that this was the reality. And then these days, it's not even as much in your face. It is kind of like that hidden thing. Where are they catching these messages? Where are they seeing them? And it doesn't take long. You watch, anything that's coming out in pop culture, and it's like, man, the messaging that's coming to our students. It's no wonder that we're seeing culturally some pretty significant, what did I say? Not changes, but some significant challenges amongst our students. Which is kind of what brings us here today. So just a couple of cultural observations. This is kind of general. It's, it'll kind of feel probably like this makes a little bit of sense, but I do want to know where you're seeing it in the lives of your families. But it seems like there's this increase in anxiety, this highly active sense of alarm and general sense of danger. I was mentioning here that, my grade 1, my 6-year-old daughter, this is like last month, but came home and was anxious for a test in grade 1. Where does that come from? A 6-year-old shouldn't be anxious about a test. This is not what we want to see happen for our family. And so we're trying to, navigate, where does this come from? What does this mean? And what maybe have we done to contribute, or can we help? And just this increase in anxiousness about things. Fragility is something that we talk a lot about too, that there's a lack of resiliency and ability to cope. And so situations and experiences that kind of should feel like you could make it through, for young people these days, seems like it's actually a heavier burden than in years past or generations past. And then with all this, an increase in polarization, loss of empathy, tolerance, and connection. You see this as kids are talking even about younger and younger about things that you wouldn't think they should be tracking with, whether it be political issues or this group or that group, and this group doesn't like this group, or there's hate over here, and this group is better, and there's this polarization that's kind of baked into the way that social networks and online seems to work, and it's kind of fused in now with our kids as well. And so with each of these things, are there examples, or are you seeing this with your young people, or how do you see it exhibited in their friends or the people around them? Is this something that feels like this is in your kind of circles as well? Any specifics or anything that kind of comes to mind where you're like, oh yeah, that was clearly an example of a rise in one of these things?
I'm in the school system, so I would say the fragility one, just absenteeism.
Yeah.
Is we've never seen before in
Yeah.
the last few years. Kids just not having enough resilience to get themselves to school, and it's quite concerning.
Yeah, and not I just needed a day to myself. In grade 3, my wife's a school teacher as well, and so grade 3 classrooms, they're not super tough, but it's seemingly challenging. Yeah, there's a fragility to it for sure.
I see it in my kids, but I work at a university, and I'm seeing it in the university age.
Yeah.
They have no resilience. They're not able to. They're facing a challenge. They just freeze.
Yeah.
They have no idea what to do. What? I don't know how to do that. How do I do that? And it's a basic step.
Yeah.
But yeah, they just don't. They can't cope.
Yes, yeah, lack of coping skills, lack of ability to press through or make it. I taught. We have Christian University in New Brunswick, and so I taught there for a couple of years. And yeah, the amount of times you're like, what is it about like not being able to submit assignments? And it wasn't like it was a lack of discipline or a lack of knowledge of the subject, or it was that they were bad students, quote unquote. It was that it was a fragility thing. It was like, I just can't bring myself to this. I can't make it through the challenge of sitting down and writing a paper. Like it was an emotional blockage of some kind to just being able to complete some simple tasks. That wasn't everybody, but it seems like it's like a lot. Yeah.
There's that connection to the anxiety piece.
Yeah.
Right? Some of the pieces I think, so I'm a teacher as well. Some of the pieces that we see as fragility, some of them I think are like they're bred out of that anxiety.
Yeah. Yeah, the anxiety's gone up. They're in the freeze, fight, flee response, and it's like I just can't make it through. I've got to do something to get out of this feeling. Yeah.
Sometimes I wonder too if like our societal things that we create as adults increase fragility. For example, it's 2 years here between the time you would write your driver's test and be able to drive like totally alone with no rules or whatever. And it's like, for us, we're like, we could do that like weeks after, and so it's not a commentary on accidents or anything. Of course, we want everybody to be safe, but I wonder what kind of a message that sends to a young driver. Like, I need 2 years before I'm good enough or whatever. It's like, are we unintentionally saying to them, you suffer too, where it's like, and maybe there's like a happy medium between that, but what other things are there like that where they're doing them later, moving out later, they're living at home longer, like, and in an attempt to care and nurture, it actually ends up having the inverse effect.
In a huge way. So Jonathan Haidt, Anxious Generation, is this book that's come out lately. It's a fascinating resource on just some of the ways that, again, without catching it, we as parents sometimes lead into that kind of stuff. And so our prime example is, so our son's 10, he's got a bike. This last summer, he knows our neighborhood, and so the question is, do you let him bike around the neighborhood without a device? And the answer is, after realizing and processing, like, yeah, of course, like you can go, you know how to get home, and if you don't, like, there's an adult that's going to be fine, you'll be safe. I had a friend in ministry, this is a couple years ago, but through the summer, let me make sure I get these ages right. I think it was summer after grade 5 and grade 7 for his 2 boys. So it would be like a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old. And both parents worked during the summer, and so he got his boys passes to the rec center for the summer. And then, because the rec center was kind of far away, he also got the passes for the bus. And this is so funny for him because he told this story to so many people. And so he rode the bus with them one day to kind of show them and make sure that they knew where to go and what stops to get off and how it worked and how the process worked. And then for the summer, they could go themselves, ride the bus, go to the rec center, and come home. And the question every parent was wondering is, did you give them a cell phone to go? And he said, no. They can go without cell phones, because what did people do 20 years ago when there were no cell phones? You would just go. And you knew that there's a phone at your destination, and the great news is these days, and the way that he described it is, he's like, if anything went wrong, they knew our numbers, and they could ask any other adult anywhere near them, and they could get access to people. But there's something in our souls and our spirits where you're like, oh, I see that baked into even me. Like, I'm hesitant even in that moment to think, like, is that the wise decision or not the right decision? What could go wrong? And the ability to, like, just keep our kids safe sometimes there's a bit of a gap here, as we might see. Now, all of these things are indeed going up. We do see this. That's absolutely true. But there's some good news, I think, that I want us to kind of start with as we get into it. Because what happens is sometimes we get a little nervous about how crazy the world has gotten. In our organization, a few years back, we did this as kind of rise in anxiety as like a core feature of our event. And we had some interesting pushback from somebody that kind of recognized that although we do see these things perhaps increasing, the challenge is to not make it as big of an epidemic as we might be concerned about. And the best way to understand this is there's a philosopher out of somewhere in Europe, and he was writing this, and it's translated from another language, so you can kind of see it's a little bit clunky. But was writing about kids And this, potentially be helpful. So the indictments are luxury, bad manners, contempt for authority, speaking of kids these days, disrespect to elders, and a love for chatter in place of exercise. Children began to be the tyrants of the slaves of their household. They no longer rose from their seats. When an elder entered the room, they contradicted their parents, chatted before company, gobbled up dainties at the table, and committed various offenses against proper taste, such as crossing their legs, and they tyrannized over their schoolmasters. And so, kids in this person's day and age are wild. And the person that wrote this was Socrates in 400 BC. Or at least it's actually a misattributed quote to Socrates. It was somebody that was taking kind of that ancient text and trying to understand what was going on in those days. And so it was actually Kenneth John Freeman, who was writing at the turn of last century, but was pulling from all of these ancient sources to recognize that every generation has the challenges of raising up young people and wondering if we're doing it right, and wondering if the challenges of the day are going to be too much and insurmountable. And so the good news is that when we realize that it can be a little bit life-giving, that we're going to be able to make it through. And so this was a couple years ago as we were talking about anxiety and our young people at our conferences. I got this email from a very prominent psychologist in our country, actually, who, as you kind of see at the bottom, or you can't see, but I'm not going to read all this, but he trains the next generation of mental health professionals. He's raising up and equips at the university level mental health professionals. And so he kind of saw our alarm around the anxiousness of our generation, and he was like, hey, just so you know, yes, we should be concerned, but it's actually not perhaps as bad. Don't be alarmist about it. And so, again, coming from this professional, he said a couple comments in brief, shared in the spirit of best practice. Contrary to some of these articles, the prevalence of mental disorders, specifically in Canadian youth, has not increased in the past 10 years. He attaches two articles. I'm going to show you one that's really fascinating from the Canadian Journal of Psychiatry, that it seems like things are kind of just consistent. And it's important that we report the accurate rates of disorders and consider all the factors, because youth mental health is very complex, and there's shared concern that the statistics can be cited and are simply not accurate. And I got a chance to talk with him at length about this, and it kind of informs a lot of what we're going to see here today. What he wanted to make sure that people realize is that if you get too alarmist about what's going on, it can become debilitating for parents, for educators, for youth workers. And the best thing is actually for parents, youth workers, and educators to actually be interested in helping and being good stewards of our children, and actually taking the responsible steps that we're meant to take. And so he was very wanting us to be hesitant about trying to make it a crisis, because in crisis, you can't operate, it's hard to get out of that. It feels like we're not professional enough to be able to solve these kinds of problems. And so what he said is part of the issues we're up against is addressing the perception that our youth are in crisis. They're not. And while a significant number do experience mental health problems and disorders, they deserve our care. The overwhelming majority are not. So he shares this thing from, and lots of data here, but from the Canadian Journal of Psychiatry. The interesting thing to note is that the prevalence of any disorder, and I'll help kind of just parse out a little bit of the way that anxiety and this kind of stuff is seen in the literature. But if it's, this is just end note, something perhaps helpful, one of the things that he wanted to draw attention to is some of the variables that have a pretty significant impact in mental disorders. 2 biological parents in the home. So again, this wasn't my reality, I didn't grow up with this. But 2 biological parents in the home, when you look at the report on any mental disorder amongst young people, dramatic difference. 15% experience any disorder, 26% if they don't have 2 biological parents in the home. This huge statistical difference. In adolescents, 13% that have 2 biological parents in the home experience some type of disorder, and 26% if the 2 biological parents aren't in the home. And again, it's not to say that it's a game over if you don't have 2 biological parents at home, but what it says is that there are a lot of variables at play with our students. And there's a lot of things that we can do as parents to help care deeply for our kids, and one of the things is having a loving relationship at home. Now, there's another research paper that came out trying to understand what this actually means and looks like. And what they found is that the biological parents in the home, 2 of them, at least in this instance, now we would say like, oh, this is the call of Christ for a husband and wife to be able to be together to raise up kids. It's a good thing. But what they were making a case for is that it's actually about the warmth of parenting in the home. And that when you have two biological parents that love each other and care for each other, it's actually easier to have a warm environment for the parenting. What they were contending for is that when you have even single parents or single moms raising kids, or it's a blended family, it's actually the warmth of the parenting and not the structure itself that protects against things like depression. So it's the structure that helps, but it's actually love as this mechanism of giving our kids the best shot at being able to make it in the world and make it beyond the challenges that can come with a mental illness or mental disorder. So interesting, and there's interesting research on this, but the point with it and what the psychologist is trying to make is that there are two different things when we talk about the fragility of our kids, when we talk about anxiousness, is that there's things that we now know to be mental health, but that they're different than what we know to also be mental illness. And the point here is that the distinction really matters for us as parents because our kids get this blended really, really quickly. Mental health is something that everybody has. Everybody has physical health, everybody has mental health. And so we have this conversation that's ongoing and constant about people's mental health, which is a good thing. The problem is when we misconstrue mental health and we think of it as mental illness. So mental health is a person's overall emotional, psychological, social well-being. It's on a spectrum. It can change from day to day or season to season. It can be strong, can be strained, can be flourishing. Everyone has it. Illness is actually very specific. It is patterns that are persistent, they're distressing, and impaired to daily function, and it's diagnosed. It's very specific medical or psychological criteria. There's forms that you can see online, the way that the doctors use this to diagnose. I'm not a doctor, I don't play one on TV, but the point is that for people that are very clearly needing extensive help, mental illness is very specific. And so there's depression, anxiety disorders, bipolar, PTSD, schizophrenia. Doesn't matter how strong or resilient you are, you can still have a mental disorder. Now, the difference is that our language is very similar. And so what happens is we have people and teaching our kids, which is the right thing, to have emotional language, and emotional language is fantastic. And so our students and our kids grow up knowing what it means to be anxious. You watch the, what's that movie that has the new orange character, Anxiety? Inside Out. Yes. My son has watched Inside Out 1, I think a dozen times, and then we went to the movies. Inside Out 2, it's fantastic. And so we have language to describe what anxiety or anxiousness is. And, I feel depressed. But I feel depressed is something that any one of us can feel depressed. I'm a Pats fan. I feel depressed after Sunday. That's a true statement. That's an okay statement. But I'm not suffering from depression. But our kids will struggle to understand the distinction and the difference if we're not careful, because we've taught, and again, not a wrong thing, but we've taught wonderful emotional language to be able to name emotions. What we have to do is step 2 and teach them what to do and how to deal with those emotions, recognizing that they're not an illness. Depressed is not an illness. Anxiousness is not an illness. Having a hard time paying attention isn't an illness. And it's a bit of a challenge because this is an easy, this last weekend I was with some friends at our conference, and it's an easy thing that we'll, throw out. Somebody had said they got distracted by something, and they're like, it's my ADHD acting out. But they're not actually diagnosed with ADHD, they're just talking about being easily distracted. But if you ever met somebody or you know somebody that's actually diagnosed with ADHD and uses medication to help with the focusing, you recognize that's a very specific thing. And being easily distracted is very different than taking medication to manage it. And so what we want to offer our kids is this understanding that there's a bit of a difference. But there's also a lot of similarities in terms of what the best course of action, the best course of treatment, or the best course of intervention, or the best way to help is for both of these things. So I want to offer you a couple thoughts here, and then I want to open to thoughts and conversations, questions, because I find this really interesting. But maybe you don't. So let's talk about it in a second. What makes things better with your mental health and what makes things better with your mental illness is almost the exact same identical list. So what makes things better with your mental health are things like metacognition, we're going to talk about that in a second, cognitive behavioral therapy skills, regular physical activity, good sleep, healthy community, guiding and active parenting. All this stuff is well studied, and all this stuff is very well clearly articulated in the literature. And so a lot of times, back in the day, we might just say this was like kind of common sense. Like you just want to be healthy. And so when we want to help our kids have better mental health, we do these kinds of things. When somebody has a mental illness, what are the treatment plans that doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists will look after? We have a psychiatrist in our church, and he's spoken at parenting seminars in my church on the East Coast. And so the great news is that when he articulates it, he's like, yeah, these are the things. Like these top 5 things are the exact same as over here. And then we add the addition typically of perhaps therapy and medication. But for most psychiatrists and doctors and mental health professionals, they're going to offer all of these other things at the same time too. And so one of the things that I think has perhaps happened for us and for our kids is that we've gotten caught with the emotional language in this place where we think that there's a crisis, we're nervous about what's happening, and it's kept us from actually just teaching our kids the right, helpful things so that they can thrive in our world today. Now, again, not an indictment on any one of us, hopefully an empowering reminder that the things that we can do for our kids are actually the best possible things we can do for our kids. As much as we love, all the language that's out there and all the teaching on mental health and all those kinds of things, it's wonderful. It's reminding our kids that the emphasis that we put on that isn't the same as like an emotional intelligence about what it's about. Makes sense? So I want to offer some thoughts on some of these things, but I want to just pause for a second because this is maybe where things could go awry or I could get a little bit over my depth. Because I'm a pastor, I'm going to go to scripture here in a second, which I feel a lot more confident in. But this kind of lays the groundwork for being able to understand our scriptures, understanding our minds and our kids' minds as we go, and perhaps a gap in the steps that we haven't been able to take thoughtfully. And so when you see this kind of thing, and as I make the suggestion that perhaps our kids have missed, and maybe just even generally in our culture have missed, the ability to kind of raise up the health. The other thing with a lot of this stuff is that there's things fighting against it. So what's actually perhaps happened is that when you think about good sleep was easier for sure 20 years ago because you didn't have a device that followed you into your bed, right? So like the fact that, mental health, there are some challenges with it, it could be contributed by bad sleep, and that's a part of like device management. So I'm not saying that these things aren't actually, that we're having an issue with mental health. It's just that as we catch the idea of what actually is helpful, I think we can find our way to target the things that maybe actually make a difference. So the device, it was easier 20 years ago to get better sleep, regular physical activity as well with devices, lowering of, physical activities and, depending on where you're at, I don't know actually the stats around here, but like lower enrollment in youth sports or, team activities, like that kind of stuff. Healthy communities gone down. Like these are the kinds of things that are definitely deteriorating, but they're not easy fixes, but they're clear fixes that we can make a shift for. Does that make sense? But let me pause for a second. Pushback, thoughts, concerns. Did I misrepresent the data? Claims of heresy. All things are possible in this moment. Yeah.
Just affirm the list of, if you were to put some as priorities though, good sleep and regular physical activity are 2 of the things you can control easiest and 2 of the quickest fixes for a lot of mental health. I'm not the expert, but I'm sitting next to someone who is and doesn't want to share publicly.
Yeah. Well, yeah, expert, do you want to speak to it?
Oh, she doesn't want to speak to it.
I guess I could. I would say sleep and physical activity, like you said, are the top 2.
Yeah.
Just because if you have good sleep and a regular active, you can have the cognition to use your CBT skills, to develop healthy community, to be responsive to your parents or the adults in your life. Because if you don't have those, you don't have capacity to engage in the other ones.
Yeah, that's and what a beautiful gift that is, because when we think about our students and our kids, and probably not your kids, because your kids are fantastic, all of you in the room. But when we talk in youth ministries and youth groups, we realize like the prevalence of lack of sleep and lack of physical activity. It's so prevalent. It's almost like it's the water that they swim in. Like, of course I'm texting at 2 a.m. Of course I need to check my socials in the middle of the night when I get to the bathroom. Like it's this weird kind of thing that has just kind of soaked into the culture. And we'll talk more about devices and device management tomorrow for those that are here, and you can watch it later. But recognizing the way that that's kind of been this massive impact. And so we're dealing with like a lot of the downstream effects of it, but if we could come all the way back and maybe, make a tweak here, that we start to get a little bit more even resilience. And you know this from being just having stayed up all night, or, you've had a crazy, trip and you're, jet lagged from going across the country. It changes your disposition. And so the idea that, sometimes our lack of resilience is just because, and this is in the scriptures, you think about Elijah, and he's like, the world is ending, this is awful, I'm gonna die, I'm running away. And God's like, hey, can I just tuck you in for a nap and give you a snack? Because right now you're hungry and you're tired, and when you wake up, you're gonna be a lot feeling better. And it's true, it happens. And this is the story of Elijah. It's sometimes as simple as that, right? I was trying to think of a story that I could share with my wife being hangry, but again, it's being recorded, so we're not going to do that one. Okay. Other thoughts, concerns, pushbacks, ideas? It's still kind of theoretical. It's starting to move a little bit more practical.
I struggle a little bit with the, the over-mention of some of these mental health things, and I feel like sometimes we kind of create a bit of a narrative. I think you kind of mentioned that before, I think we're creating a bit of a crisis when, there's issues and there's concerns that we need to address, but they're maybe not all as bad or as big as it really is. It's just the over-mention of some of these things creates some of that awareness, or I don't know what the need for issues. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a combination where if you can have a warmth in the parenting where you want to actually hear and you're like, I want to understand what you're going through, but on the flip side, it's okay to not feel 100%. It's okay to have an anxious feeling in this moment. And it's interesting working with a family and just very concerned about their 12-year-old having anxiety and having an anxiety disorder. But when you piece out what's going on in their family, it's like, yeah, of course you should be anxious because there's this massive disruption at home and there's a breakup of relationship. And so there's a parent moving out, and then there's bullying happening at school. And then on top of that, a lack of, good nutrition. So you start piecing all these things together, and it's like, yes, there's an anxiousness, and yeah, you probably want to talk to a doctor, and obviously we're not diagnosing, I'm not a doctor, but at the same time, you're like, sometimes you can see where this stuff is coming from, and the goal is like, can we actually solve for some of these other things, and can we build some resilience inside of the student so that you can make it through. And the good doctors, and this is not to badmouth doctors, because doctors are, when they have the time and ability to take time going through this kind of stuff, are actually going to offer all these same kind of things. Like they're going to talk through, hopefully, the broad section. The problem, honestly, I think, is that kids play doctor on the playground. And they're talking to each other and they start self-diagnosing. So by the time that they actually end up talking to a doctor, they've got enough GPT lingo and language that they're like, yeah, I've got an anxiety disorder and I need 10 milligrams of this dog thing. And like, this is going to be the detail that solves it because I've searched it already online. Like,
we do that too, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't going to say that out loud. Thank you. Yeah, sure. And it is like a sense of, I wonder if I can solve this on my own, because you want agency, like you want to be able to fix the problem. But the challenge then becomes that we've taken away, thinking we're adding agency into the situation. Sometimes we lose the best parts of our own agency, which is that we could solve this in right community with people that are experts, perhaps. Other thoughts, pushbacks? Yeah, there's I want to get you a resource just because I know it's pretty close and near and dear, but
I would really appreciate it.
Yeah, our friend, and actually Jared and I both have grown up learning from our professor. You had Marv? No, you didn't have Marv, no. But our close friend Marv Penner actually wrote the book. He's a Canadian counselor on kids who cut and how to be helpful in those moments and just understanding that a bit more. Okay, so what I want to highlight and what I want to do, we're going to do kind of three things here. I want to highlight a couple of things from this list, and then I want us to think about, on a personal reflection, how this is playing out in our own world. See, the interesting thing for us as parents is that more is caught than taught, right? This is when you recognize, you get to Christmas and you're like, wait a second, I'm doing that because my mom did that, growing up. The times where, you're on the road trip and you're like, why did I start saying that? It's like, yeah, I caught that from my own upbringing, and it's easier for things to kind of flow naturally from what you've just caught from your own experience. And so for our kids, knowing that it's much reflect what we show them through our own world. And so this is going to quickly turn to a personal exercise, which is going to be terrifying. And then I wanted to bring us to the scriptures, because recognizing what we're seeing from the research and even from current best practices, it's fascinating to realize that these have actually been baked into our scriptures right from the very start. And that we are invited to these same kinds of things throughout our scriptures. Okay, so fascinating that when we have challenges, these are the things that we're invited into. I want to take just a moment and talk about cognitive behavioral therapy, metacognition. I mentioned Jonathan Haidt. He also wrote The Coddling of the American Mind, which speaks a little bit to the fragility of students in universities. And what he kind of highlights in terms of the dissonance that they experience is a lack of being able to do the work that happens in cognitive behavioral therapy, but it's these skills that aren't just solely used in that therapy modality. It's actually just good practice and thinking. And so just a couple of quick thoughts on it, but the Canadian Centre for Addiction and Mental Health talks about CBD as the ability to help people learn to identify, question, and change how their thoughts, attitudes, and beliefs relate to the emotional and behavioral reactions that cause them difficulty. So although this is a part of people's therapy, and there's wonderful exercises and expressions of it, it's also just kind of how we want to raise up and teach our kids. That when they have an emotional reaction to something, or when they're experiencing anxiousness, or when they're feeling down about something, or feeling like they got bullied at school, that part of our jobs as parents is to kind of guide them through that process and identify how their thoughts and how their assumptions are maybe playing into the ways and the things that they're feeling. Now, I have kids too, so I know it's not like you just show them a PowerPoint and then they get it and they live it out, right? Like my 8-year-old has this oversized expression of justice, and so he will constantly tell everybody around him that it's their fault that he wasn't able to pull off, the Jenga thing. And it's like, it was your fault. And it's like, no, Archer, no. But also, that's his emotional response. And so part of our job as parents is to, over time, help them walk through and understand when you have that outburst, where did that come from? How did that make you feel? And lots of times it doesn't work. But sometimes you get through and you get the 8-year-old who's able to look at you and say, I just don't know why I said those things. Like, I don't believe any of those things, after yelling at his mom and telling her how much he hates her. He's like, I don't really actually hate you, Mom. And it's fascinating when we can help them at least walk through and catch, and you get the glimpses of their understanding a bit that just because they felt it, it's not necessarily true. And so we're taking little steps along the way. Cognitive behavioral therapy, again, is something specific. We're not all going to become experts in it. But the cool thing is that we can learn and take some of the skills or the checklists or the tools and tactics from it and apply it to some of the things that we're doing with our kids. And so it's about identifying distortions in thinking, seeing thoughts and ideas about what's going on rather than as facts, standing back from thinking and considering situations from different viewpoints. I referenced Arthur Brooks, who's talked about happiness, and he talks about it kind of through the lens of what he would say is metacognition, the act of experiencing your emotions consciously, separating them from your behavior and refusing to be controlled by them. My friend Steve from our team, he puts together, and when he kind of talks this through, he uses this reception spectrum for emotions. And there's this idea that, and somebody mentioned that sometimes when we experience an emotion, there's some categories that we try to compartmentalize those problematic ones and just prohibit them. So like, oh, don't be anxious about that. Like, don't be angry, but you're not supposed to be angry about that. It's like prohibit. You're not allowed to feel that emotion, and we just try to downplay it, and we try to box it up. And I mean, honestly, sometimes when we're on the road trip and the kids are fighting in the back, like I just wish they would bottle up their emotions and deal with it in therapy in 10 years from now. So it's not to say that there's sometimes we hope for those things, but the prohibiting of emotions isn't always the most helpful thing. And then the protecting isn't always that helpful thing. Because for us as parents, if we're constantly trying to find safe places for them where they're less likely to experience that emotion, then they don't learn how to deal with that emotion in a safer spot. And so instead, if we could as parents, and this seems to be where, again, literature and research shows us, is that we're trying to help them understand and regulate their emotions and process alongside of them. So it becomes a conversation. This is the implication of as parents. Now, the crazy thing is that then we have to be self-reflective and say, where do we live into this and where do we fall short? Because if I'm not careful, and we're not always careful, I recognize that my kids hear how my wife and I talk at the dinner table about being frustrated at somebody. And we're not seeing the other side of the perspective. They just see us getting angry at somebody. Or if you have somebody that experiences road rage and you're in the vehicle, I grew up with somebody in my family that had road rage all the time. And so I was constantly watching an adult who didn't know how to regulate their emotions, because when something wrong happened on the road or they got lost, it just went to sky high 10 out of 10 all the time. And so we look for ways in our own world where we can model what it looks like to be a healthy adult and to process even our own expressions and emotions and that sort of thing. It's an interesting thing, even with the faith. So the faith of our kids is something we contend so much for. Everything that we see around research is that if you can model faith fully lived out as an adult, that your kids will naturally want to step and walk in that. And so instead of just telling them that Jesus is the answer, you show them what it's like. You show them what it's like to trust him even when it's difficult. You talk openly about the challenge or the doubt or the concern. You talk openly about sharing your faith with somebody. We see this in youth groups that grow. This is different, not quite connected to this, but ministries that seem to take off are the ones where adults actually live out the express values of the ministry. And so, in youth ministries, we always thought the answer was like you tell kids, invite your friends to church, invite your friends to church. And so we try to convince them to do it, but none of the adults are doing it. And so instead we say, no, you have to have the stories of going out and doing the thing and realizing how difficult it is to invite somebody to come to church. And then you share that openly with the kids around you to say, and this is for your kids, you show them what it's like to pray for your neighbors. I've been praying. I was at work yesterday, and I was praying for my coworker, and the kids are like, yeah. And you're like, well, and I thought I'd get a chance to talk about Jesus with him, and like, yeah. And you're like, yeah. And so then I went over, and I said, hey, do you want to talk about faith? And you know what they said? What? They said no. And that was it. That was the end of the conversation. And then I was embarrassed, and I went back to my seat. And you're like, okay, what's the goal of that? Well, the goal is for them to understand the nature of how this is difficult sometimes. That they can see you, obviously, when there's challenges, but for you to be able to reflect back and show them what it's like to process things. And learn how to take, in the midst of even challenging circumstances, the peace of God and the courage that it takes to walk through it. So we reflect on our own journeys a little bit, and where our kids are witnessing and seeing us. And are we able to exhibit the things we want our kids to live out in the adult environments? And it honestly goes down to as young as you've got kids for. Like you want them to see it as young as they are. So then we carry this, and now we start to look at the scriptures and we realize God's actually designed us for this work all along. And he's invited us into this throughout the story of the scriptures. And if we're not careful, we can belittle emotions and we can belittle the expressions of them. And so this is a common verse, and sometimes if you've gotten into it with somebody and you're trying to convince them that emotions are bad, sometimes this becomes one of the rallying cries. This is my command. This is the Lord talking. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged. And if we leave it at that, then it's like this sense of, no, to be afraid or to be discouraged, God isn't asking you to do any of those things. He's commanding you not to do those things. And for sometimes, and this is not to say this has been your experience, but this is what we try to challenge people and push people with. The problem with that is that this verse has got a few things going against that usage. The first is that God was speaking very specifically to Joshua. And he was walking into battle, and it was with the people of God. And so we have to recognize that when we're reading scripture, there's context. Although it's written for us, it's not necessarily always to us. And the other part about this verse is that it goes on in a really important, powerful way. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. And so although this verse is speaking to Joshua, we don't necessarily claim it in every possible example in our lives, we recognize that the God that we talk about, that we invite our kids into, is a God that goes with us. We know this from the New Testament, that the Spirit of God lives inside of each and every single believer. And so if the Lord is with you everywhere that you go, and for Joshua, this gave him the ability to bring his fear and bring his discouragement and know that if God is with him, although it's the fear and the discouragement might be there, that he can speak back to that emotion. That's a gift that we can offer back to our kids. And you start to see if it was a matter of God saying, like, hey, fear and discouragement, like that's something you're never going to experience again. It's awful then to go through and read the rest of the scriptures and realize that the story of Joshua would have been clearly known by David. And as the Psalms were written, you'd be like, well, man, you missed the mark. Because he would write, when anxiety was great within me, the Lord, your consolation brought me joy. And so here's David experiencing anxiety, an emotion, negative, and yet, even in the midst of that, finding joy in the Lord. And so it's not that it's shutting down the anxiety, it's like, no, this is something that I'm experiencing. But what do I do when I experience it? I find still joy in the Lord, the presence of the Lord, what Joshua would have had. The Psalms are full of emotion, just so you know. This is just a short selection. Psalm 56, when I'm afraid, I put my trust in you. Here's what we see about like speaking to your emotions, about experiencing something and then kind of stepping back and trying to reflect on it. Is this a true emotion? Is this helpful? Can I think about it? I put my trust in you when I am afraid. Thank you so much. You're welcome. And so it's a beautiful reminder that fear and being afraid is going to obviously happen for us, for our kids. But what they do with that is the question. Jesus, throughout the New Testament, constantly talking about fear not, fear not, fear not. Why did he have to remind his disciples to fear not? Because they were afraid. They had fear. It was constant. It was so often. The psalmist, pour out your heart to him, for God is our refuge. We bring things to the Lord and allow the Lord to speak the truth into us. It's this work of understanding that it's okay to wrestle and to process difficult things, but we do it openly with the Lord. And if we carry faith, we show what that is like. We exhibit that in prayer in front of our kids. As a family, we pray over the thing that's causing the challenges in our midst. We pray for people that are experiencing difficulties so that they know that when you're experiencing even the hardest of things, that's when you're supposed to run to the Lord. Jesus himself was here on earth. He offered prayers and pleadings with a loud cry and tears to the one who could rescue him from death. And so for our kids, when they cry or when they are sad or when they are pleading for something to change in their life, are they knowing that one of the best things they could do is actually to plead with the Lord, to bring their tears to him? Do they see us as when we're in the most of our struggles doing likewise? And then Philippians, again, there's lots of this, but the peace of God which transcends all understanding will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Last, what day is it today? Today's Monday? A week ago, 2 weeks ago, I visited Beth Steves. Beth was in her late 80s. She's a part of our church for a while. Her and her husband, Harry, were instrumental in my wife's and our relationships because Harry, I was a single pastor, and so he's like, hey, if you want to borrow my convertible. Absolutely, Harry, when the time is right. And the time was right. I was dating this pretty curly-haired girl from Miramichi. I said, Harry, can I borrow your convertible? And we had, Chantel and I, when we were dating, really the critical conversations about the future, and will we get married, and where will we go? Driving Harry's convertible. And then 5 years ago, Harry passed away, and 2 weeks ago, I was visiting Beth in her home. She was coming to the end of her life. And she had been diagnosed with cancer just 2 weeks before her husband died, but she didn't tell him. She kept it secret. And so I'm visiting Beth, and I walk in her home, and she's sitting up, and wildly, like a week before she died, she was alert. She was okay. She had cancer had spread quite a bit, and so I just said, Beth, like, how are you doing? And she's like, the Lord is so good to me. I'm like, like that just hits you early. It's hit me. And I'm like, well, tell me more about that. Like, I want to know. And I'm listening to this woman talk about how God was so good to her, even as everything was deteriorating around her and she was getting ready to die. And it's this sense that there is this beautiful peace of God which doesn't make sense to the world, but it's something that we invite and ask the Lord for, and that we come before Him even as our circumstances are crumbling around us. And I kind of wish in that moment that I had one of my kids with me so that they could have seen it, but it would have been awful, not right, and not the right spot. But it's the story that I share with them so that they would recognize that life's circumstances are going to be terrible sometimes. And that's okay, because our faith is actually designed for us to still thrive even in the hardest of circumstances. And it's this sense for our kids that they would recognize that our goal isn't always to manage our circumstances around us, to experience the joy and the peace and the patience and the good mental health. It's to actually recognize that even when it's the most difficult, that the Lord is still good and that we can still experience joy, peace, and comfort. And Beth was the example of that. And so then a week later, we were running our conference in Saskatoon last week, and I told her, I'm going away, but I'd love to visit you again. And I'm texting with her son on the day, because I'm flying in. I'm landing at 6 on Sunday last week, and that was the day that she kind of had passed. And so when I landed, I got the call from her son. That was it. But I knew, because I had asked her the week before, I'm like, man, what are you going to say to her husband, Harry? Because her husband, of course, had died before, and you get to heaven, and what are you going to say to him? She's like, shut for a minute. She's like, I might say that it's been a pretty tough 4 years, but you know what? None of that really matters right now. And it was this beautiful vision of what God was doing for Beth in the most difficult and awful moments. And it's the kind of thing that, at least for me, fuels my faith to recognize that what I'm hoping that my kids experience is that same kind of faith and trust in the Lord that Beth had. The peace of God is really fascinating. Shalom in the Old Testament. I forget the Greek word. It doesn't matter, because unless you know Greek, you don't care. But there's a beautiful video that the Bible Project put together. I was going to show you, but I'm going to just skip by it. But I encourage you to take a look and see, because it's this part of our faith that God invites us into so often throughout the Scriptures. It talks so much about the peace of God. And for our kids to experience that, it is one of the things that is so shocking to our world, that is indeed anxious and fragile and frustrated. And we have this beautiful offering that it's a gift from the Lord, but it requires us to be careful stewards of it in inviting our kids to experience it, and to show them what it looks like, and to show them what it means. So, the bright spots that you're experiencing, I think, are worth catching and understanding, because it's a good reminder that these are true things and you're experiencing them. Like, you're experiencing them in certain measures in your home, and to be only focused on the challenges, the difficulties, would miss the fact that I think God's been faithful in your family's story and in your family's life. And when you can point out where the Lord is working and where you experience this beautiful peace, it's also worth just kind of shining a light and expanding that. And so I'd encourage you to think about where that is. I want to go to just some last questions here in a moment, but I want to leave you with this verse, because this one hits me, because from a father's perspective, and perhaps this might be helpful. But 1 Thessalonians, Paul's talking about ministry with the church in Thessalonica, which is the point of the letter. And there's something that happens with our faith too that is worth. You don't have a lot here on it, but there's something about throughout the New Testament that invites us to experience faith in light of the spiritual family that God's inviting us into. So in the Old Testament, the family of God was the Israelites. This is who God blesses so that they would be a blessing to the nations. But in the New Testament, there's something interesting that happens with Jesus, where as he's gathered with his disciples and he's teaching, and they come and they're like, hey, your mom's here, and your brothers. And he's like, who's my mother and my brothers? I'm sure Mary's outside. She's like, boy, I changed your diaper for 5 years. You better come and say hi to your mom. But at the same time, he's making this point about the spiritual family, that there's this invitation that we participate in a broader network, a broader family, a broader community, that our kids, yeah, they get us, and this is a good responsibility for us to raise them, but we're also called to bring them into this family. If you look around this room even, like, it's a beautiful thing, the fact that you guys are raising kids together, and where you can have your kids experience and catch on to what it means to follow Christ from the people around you, like, it's such a cool thing. We're experiencing this in Moncton, and it's fascinating. I grew up in the church that I'm now a pastor at, and that I'm raising my kids in. And so legitimately, like, the guys that I graduated with and that were in my wedding, like, their kids and my kids play together. And then our parents are now the grandparents, and so they're wandering around the church looking at all their grandkids running around playing together. Like, it's just kind of this beautiful, cool thing. And so we love the fact that the Lord has placed us in a spot where there's other families doing this work and that we can be in it together. But Paul, trying to explain what it means to be the spiritual family of one another, says, "For you know that we dealt with each of you as a father deals with his own children." Which is interesting because for Paul, articulating this is of course an invitation to the way that ministry was happening with the church. But as a father, I'm like, wait, how am I supposed to deal with my children? It's kind of like where I'm leaving it on this. Encouraging, comforting, and urging them to live lives worthy of God. How does the father deal with his children? Encouraging them, comforting them, and urging them to live lives worthy of God. And of all the research that will say, warm parenting, and this is how it's supposed to look, and here we go 2,000 years ago, this is the invitation. This has been what God has clarified and invited us into, this kind of care and love for our kids, that we could help them grow into who God has called them to be, so that as you noticed at the early parts of this morning, or this evening, that we're wanting them to follow after Christ, we're wanting them to stand firm in faith, we're wanting them to stand for truth, and that we get a chance to operate and do that as people who follow after the Lord. So, let me just open up for a couple thoughts, questions, and then I'll leave you with an interesting video that will spark your interest maybe for tomorrow night. Thoughts, questions, claims of heresy. If you were to go from here, the hope is that you would take this idea that you have what it takes to build resilience in your kids for this generation. It may or may not be an epidemic, it may or may not be the world is on fire around the resiliency of our kids, but no matter what it is, you're perfectly positioned and equipped to be able to do what it takes to raise them up in this world. You know what I mean? And the tools and the resources that you have at your disposal are not complex. They may be difficult, trying to teach a 16-year-old to put their phone away and to go to bed on time. Like, yeah, that's hard work, but it's not complicated work, and you guys can get there with that. Trying to help an 8-year-old understand that their emotions don't have to dictate the rest of their day or their week. The amount of times that my 8-year-old said, "This is the worst day ever." Boy, we were just in Disney World, like the entire day in the Magic Kingdom, and just because you didn't get a cookie at the end doesn't make it the worst. He won't remember that, but I will for the rest of my life. But you're equipped to be able to help them understand and to process their emotions if we take the time and to understand. You bring them into community with other people so that they know what it's like to have friends, and so that they know what it's like to actually have people that they can talk to instead of just the things that are on the screen. You're equipped for the things that God has invited you into in raising these young people. And you live it out as you, as a parent, understand that the stakes are high, but that you're also in the trenches. I'm in the trenches, trying to manage my own emotions and trying to manage my own bedtime routine, and trying to show my kids that I can put the phone down at the dinner table and be focused on conversations eyeball to eyeball with them, because I want them to catch the fact that this is what you do when you're with people. So it's not complicated. It is difficult, but I think you're ready for it. I think you're equipped for it. Let me pray for you. I'll stick around for as long as you want, and anybody that wants to chat. I'm going to show you one crazy video after this that we'll talk more about tomorrow. with the rise of AI and the rise of technology, and just tomorrow we'll have a lot more practical tools and resources on how to deal with it. But for now, let me close this off with a word of prayer. Father, I'm grateful that you created us, that you made us, that it's no surprise to you that we would be challenged in our world today. And Lord, I'm grateful that our faith was led by men and women who were willing to sacrifice everything. Lord, that we follow in the footsteps of people whose circumstances were so much more difficult than ours. And yet, even in the midst of the most challenging of times and circumstances, that faith can remain strong and that your peace can exist even in the midst of it. And so, Lord, I pray that you would offer each and every one of us your peace that passes all understanding. Lord, that we'd be willing to work through the challenges of our day and the things that we experience so that our kids could see, not perfect parents, but Lord, parents that look to you for hope and guidance, and parents that are willing to do difficult things in processing even the hardest of circumstances with you. And then, Lord, would you just give us just a measure of your grace so that when we mess it up, that you as the good Father would look after our kids and help them see that even as though we're broken people, that they can make it through and that they'll be able to live a life in service to you, even with imperfect parents. So go with us tonight, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, tomorrow night, we're going to start with this video.
Wakey, wakey, rise and shine. Morning, Joey. You were snoring again. Definitely wear your favorite green jacket. Look, now we're really vibing. Have a good day. Hey, cutie.
Hi, Amanda. Great brainstorming last night.
Actually, I need more.
What if we flip the design here? Do you think it can work?
Nice. I think you're onto something.
Hold steady, soldier. We need more air support.
Yeah.
Whoa, clean shot. Nice one.
Oof. Maybe aim for the head next time? Great line of sight.
Switch to burst fire mid-range.
GG, that was amazing. Ready to go again? This is Project Ava, your AI desk companion. Do you think they know we're actually calling the shots?
Nope, let's keep it that way.
That's real life, friends. Let's talk about it tomorrow if you're here, and if not, you can check it out online. Have a good rest of your night.